All right. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. Um, I'm Connor Freely. I'm the Director of External Engagement here at CareerWise, and I'm very excited to have you guys join us for today's conversation on starting and scaling youth apprenticeship programs in the skilled trades. Across the CareerWise network and beyond, we're seeing a growing momentum around connecting young people to construction, manufacturing, and other high-demand trades. Fields that offer not just strong wages, but real pathways to long-term family-sustaining careers. But as many of you know, the opportunity doesn't come without challenges. And when we talk to intermediaries and employers, we hear some familiar concerns. Number one is that employers are wondering about liability, safety, and productivity, and whether young people are really ready for a job site. Partners are looking for clearer ways to demonstrate return on investment, not just in dollars, but in workforce development, culture, and retention, and the ongoing challenge of how to communicate the value of apprenticeship in a way that builds confidence and broadens participation. Today's session is designed to tackle those challenges head on. We'll hear directly from leaders who have moved employers from maybe to yes, who built pathways that truly work for both young people and industry, and who are shaping systems that make apprenticeship a sustainable part of the skilled trades talent pipeline. We brought together a diverse and dynamic panel to help us explore these issues from every angle today. First, we'll hear from Andrew, the founder, president, and CEO of Building Futures, an intermediary and advocate who's built his organization from the ground up to connect underserved communities with careers instruction. Andrew will share what he's learned about engaging hesitant employers, addressing misconceptions about youth readiness, and making the ROI return investment case for apprenticeship in ways that resonate. Then we'll turn to Marina, a national policy and systems leader and the executive director of Building Futures. Sorry, Trade Futures. We just talked about Trade Building Futures, who's worked across the federal, state, and nonprofit landscape. Marina will help us zoom out to the bigger picture, what it takes to shift employer mindsets at scale, how messaging can strengthen both equity and participation, and how apprenticeship helps unions and employers connect with future talent. Together, this group represents the full ecosystem it takes to make apprenticeship work, from policy to practice, from employers to apprentices. Throughout the session, we'll explore some main practical questions. How do we overcome employer skepticism and misconceptions? How do we clearly show the financial and workforce return on investment of apprenticeship? And how do we tell the story of apprenticeship in a way that both inspires and sustains employer engagement? By the end of today's discussion, we hope you'll leave with concrete strategies, messaging tools, and examples you can apply in your own communities so that together we can continue expanding access to high quality apprenticeship experiences for more young people across the skilled trades. So, thank you all for being here and thank you for your leadership making this work possible. With that, let's dive in. Andrew, I'd love to start with you. Could you tell us a little bit about Building Futures and what you've learned about moving employers from maybe to yes, and also a little bit about yourself and how your work brought you here?
Yeah, sure. It's a pleasure to be with you, Connor. Thanks for the invitation. Building Futures really, I built a program that I could have used as a young adult myself. So, in large part, I'll make a distinction right off the bat between apprenticeship readiness, pre-apprenticeship, and registered apprenticeship. And Building Futures launched in 2007 with two core programs that we still run today. One is a very comprehensive pre-apprenticeship program, which prepares people who are experiencing poverty for success, placement, and retention and completion of registered apprenticeship. We also launched with an apprenticeship utilization program that worked directly with employers to stimulate demand for new employees who were apprentices on active job sites. Those two programs together provide sort of a connective tissue around the registered apprenticeship system, which such high quality programs are run by the joint programs that are out there in the construction trades. And we wanted to leverage that. So Building Futures was designed specifically to be able to scale up or down depending on industry demand, to be a flexible program for young adults and beyond, and to prepare people well for success. And I know this, what it takes, because it's part of my own story. I became a union carpenter's apprentice at the age of 17. When I first walked on the job, it was, I knew how to show up every day on time. I knew how to work hard, knew how to apply myself. I knew how to be dependent and reliable. And I was a valuable employee from day one. And that, I think, is part of the key in terms of convincing employers, and I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit later. To move them from a maybe to a yes, you have to demonstrate value. So I'll leave it there for now, just so I don't start getting too excited and talk too much. But there's a lot of interesting ways in which we can approach this to create real change for populations who need it.
Thank you, Andrew. And important to note that there is no such thing as being too excited about apprenticeship. But I'll kick it to Marina now, who is the incredible executive director of Trades Futures. Marina would love to hear about your work, how you got here, and some background on Trades Futures.
Sure. Thank you so much, Connor and Andrew. Great to be here, everyone. I'm Marina Javrankova. I'm the Executive Director of Trades Futures. We are a national nonprofit that was established by NABTU, which is North America's Building Trade Unions, and industry partners. We are about, it's 2025, so only about 3 years old. But the work that we do used to exist under the union, so used to exist under NABTU and has existed for a long time, since about 2008. And our main sort of bread and butter is our network of 270 apprenticeship readiness programs, of which Building Futures Rhode Island is one. And our programs are, and Andrew made a bit of this distinction when during his introduction, our apprenticeship readiness programs, which are multi-craft, which means they typically prepare individuals for a range of options in construction careers. So as opposed to an apprenticeship program, which is typically trade specific, you would go through an electrician apprenticeship or a plumbing and pipe fitting apprenticeship or carpentry like Andrew. We expose participants to all of the crafts that are available to them and what it would be like to have a career in the construction trades, and in particular in the union construction trades. One of the most exciting, I would say, and I would say organic areas of growth for us has been our programs in schools. We currently have approximately 80 programs in schools, and I think what's really interesting is just to sort of emphasize that word organic, is that our work really started focused on adult facing programs, right? Sort of short-term preparatory programs to expose individuals to the industry and facilitate their entry into apprenticeships and construction careers. But many of our partners wanted to do this work earlier on, right? Wanted to start with high school students. And so we've seen a lot of growth in the area, and I know we'll talk about that today as well. And then for me personally, just to sort of bridge the gap. So my background, is not in union construction work. I came at this from a workforce development perspective. I've worked across a wide variety of sectors in workforce development. And I think if you're a workforce development professional and your interest is in having the people you work with find good jobs, union construction is a really good way to do that. The construction industry, alone, I think, is not necessarily a good job. There are a lot of challenges across construction, and unions support their workers and their participants in ensuring that they are safe and paid, and also have a pension, right, that carries from job to job, which many of our participants do. So that's kind of the angle at which I come at this, which is that I want the folks that I work with to be secure and it be in family sustaining jobs, and this is a tried and true pathway to get there.
Awesome. Thank you, Marina. I couldn't agree more. Well, thank you both for giving some background. We're going to dive into some of our questions here. Just a reminder for folks attending and in the chat. At any point, if you have any questions for either of our panelists or for me, feel free to just drop it in the chat and we will address them as we go. So first question for Andrew. You built Building Futures from the ground up, and it was focused on bridging access between underserved communities and those family-sustaining construction careers that Marina was talking about for young people. What have you learned about what it really takes to move hesitant employers from maybe to yes? And what have you done to help convince employers that this is good for them, good for their community, good for the economy, but also makes sense from a workforce development perspective?
Yeah, well, I will say that the beginning is the hardest. Because over time you can present the data to folks and the data will make the case for you. But in the beginning, when you don't have the data set yet, that is when it is really a relational dynamic. And I will say that an employer or a union or anybody who sponsors a registered apprenticeship program, they're not doing it for charity. They are doing it because they need a predictable talent development pipeline. They need to be able to bring employees from the entry-level skills that are necessary for any employee to be proficient to full occupational proficiency within the span of the apprenticeship program, which means they need to be productive workers from day one. So the key really is that the first placement is an ambassador. That first placement is absolutely key because unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, negative makes a far stronger impression than positive. So first placements are absolutely critical in terms of winning over the employer or the sponsor or the union or whoever the hiring agent happens to be. It's incredibly important. So by doing that over time, though, we can demonstrate the value proposition. So I can show, we're up to about 500 placements in 16 different building trades unions at this point, and I can show that somebody who came from Building Futures pre-apprenticeship has the supportive services, received the comprehensive in-depth supports that are necessary, and the advanced training to pick the right trade. They're going to succeed and retain at a higher rate than somebody off the street. And the data doesn't lie. Right? So we can demonstrate this through Rapids data. We can demonstrate this in a variety of different ways. But when an employer first encounters a Building Futures graduates, they may say, oh, what's this Building Futures program? I'm not sure if I want to participate in that. By the time they're done having an experience with one of the young adults who came through our pre-apprenticeship, they're saying, what about that Building Futures? I'd like to have another. Right? And that's really the key, is the ambassadors, the value proposition, demonstrating value from day one, and recognizing that an employer is not there for charity. They're there for their business model, and we have to respect that. It's a partnership between an employer and an employee, which is why, though, registered apprenticeship may be union neutral, but it represents a compact between an employer and an employee around their learning. So you might want to think about it as a learning contract that comes with wage advancement guaranteed, right? So in that scenario, value leads. So as long as you can demonstrate the value and you're careful with your relationship building, the first ambassadors will pave the way for many more hundreds to come.
Thank you, Andrew. I think you hit the nail on the head there, and I think that's an important lesson for everybody here to think about. Obviously, we are all, apprenticeship practitioners, intermediaries, and state workers at various levels here. The most important organizing tool we have for this are employers who are doing it well, who can convince other employers that it is the right thing to do, and they are the most valued messengers. So creating those ambassadors in the ecosystem is super, super helpful. Marina, from Trades Futures perspective, as a national practitioner, from your national vantage point, what are the biggest levers we can pull to shift employer mindsets and move from those isolated success stories to broader, sustained engagement in youth apprenticeship?
Well, first I would say that just to echo everything that Andrew said, I think one of the areas of work where we're looking to focus on now is sort of ensuring that we know what works across our network and that we are able to sort of elevate those practices and implement them across the board. So what's happening at Building Futures doesn't only have to be happening in Rhode Island, right? But how do we ensure that we leverage our platform and our position to support our network of programs to doing that on their end as well? And one example of that, obviously we have a large number of contractor partners. Our local programs have a large number of contractor and I would say project owner partners. So not necessarily just the folks that hire apprentices, but the folks that are actually paying for the construction of the work that they're doing. Those are really important, not direct employers, but industry partners as well. So the number one question is sort of what is the demand, right? Do you have the available workforce that you need to construct the project that you or maintain, right? The project that you are looking to construct or maintain. And in many cases, the answer is no. And so in many cases, our contractor and owner partners are very interested in ensuring that they are cultivating a local pipeline of talent. And they do that in lockstep with the union, right? To ensure that both partners are recruiting not just by word of mouth, but from communities that are traditionally underrepresented in many of these jobs that we're looking to fill. Just one example, because a lot of times this can be very local. We have a small program in Tennessee, in Oak Ridge. That program was started through an investment by an owner in the region who actually not just funded the program, but also got several contractors in the area to commit to hiring graduates from that particular program. It's a small program. It's not, as you can imagine, it's not the same type of demand that you may have in major metropolitan areas, but that type of partnership and commitment reflects the real need, right, that owner and their contractor partners had to ensure that there is local talent coming onto their project sites. The second sort of value add, I would say, both on the union and the employer side is retention. And that was one of the initial sort of rationales for even establishing the apprenticeship readiness program model, which is we had apprentices that were leaving apprenticeships. And when asked, why are you leaving? A very common answer was, well, it wasn't what I expected. And so an apprenticeship is a significant commitment, right? 4+ years. It's a major commitment, especially for a young person to make. I did not know what I wanted to do when I was 18 or younger, and many of our apprentices are typically older, right, when they start their journey. So as much as we can expose folks to the reality of what it looks like to do this type of work in a lower lift manner, that can improve retention on the back end, which is an obvious value add for both the union and employer. And then the third piece I would say is building the ecosystem. So in many cases, many of our school-based programs, like in terms of bringing employers and unions to the table, they are not necessarily the first apprenticeship readiness program that is started in the area. Typically, there's an adult-based program or something like that. Austin is a good example. We have a program run by the union, a program run by the community-based organization, a program run by a community college, and one run by a high school. And that creates an ecosystem because there's been some proven success with those other programs, right? And now they're looking to reach into the younger grades and to ensure that we're recruiting from across the board. So building off of existing successes, like to Andrew's point, it's very hard to do that at the beginning, but for our youth serving programs in particular, it is a benefit to be in an area where there is existing adult serving work that has been successful.
Thanks, Marina. And I know obviously a big piece of Trades Futures is that apprenticeship readiness point and getting students ready for apprenticeship. So Andrew, going back to you, a lot of folks, particularly employers, construction companies, unions, et cetera, are worried about whether young people are really ready for job sites. Obviously, a group like Trade Future are trying to help with that. But what do you say to employers with that mindset who are a little trepidatious about jumping into hiring youth in job sites, and how do you help them see the potential in youth apprenticeship?
Yeah, well, it's an understandable concern, right? So if you're truly not prepared for the opportunity and you're a young adult entering into a formal registered apprenticeship program, it will be the world's worst first job. I promise you that. You have to have the expectations dialed in correctly. So, for instance, we're talking about a spectrum of services here, right? So, say a high school-based program, and we, on behalf of the Rhode Island Building and Construction Trade Councils, help facilitate high schools who want to adopt and incorporate the MC3 curriculum and become apprenticeship readiness programs under Marina's curriculum and all the great work that we could do through Trade Futures. Very often, a high school environment doesn't have the luxury of simulating the industry norms the way a pre-apprenticeship program based in the community can. So one of the things that I would say is we can bring an employer in to our controlled learning environment in our pre-apprenticeship facility and show them how ready the young adults are for the rigors of the apprenticeship world, because we have 15,000 square feet where it's run just like a job site, where you can see young adults working hand in hand with their mentors to learn the basic skills that are applicable across the different trades, experimenting with different techniques, different occupations. We build a 60-foot by 12-foot by it's about 6 feet high ironwork bridge, right? Where we have an overhead crane where we're flying in steel, we're showing people how to connect, and we're running it like a job site. And people can see the level of maturity, responsibility, the safety, the preparation of the young adults before they ever step foot in the job site. And, that truly can take away somebody's trepidations around, well, is this young person even know what I'm getting into? Well, when they see it, that is a powerful testimony to the fact that, yes, in fact, this young person does know what they're getting into, and they're prepared to exceed at a higher rate than somebody off the street. Seeing is believing, and I do think that, I had the pleasure of serving on the Federal Advisory Committee on Apprenticeship for about 8 years. And during that time period, we led the Increasing Opportunities Work Group to really hone in on a pre-apprenticeship quality framework, which I think is really important today. We are not looking to have young adults exploring apprenticeships supplant workers on a job site. We need to enable a controlled learning environment which allows for young adults to experience it, to get ready, to be prepared, and succeed once they are placed as registered apprentices. And I think that's key. So if I had an employer who was not convinced that they could trust a young adult coming from Building Futures, the very first thing I would do is set up a tour, say, come and see for yourself, and you'll see for yourself that you can.
Thank you, Andrew. And I think that's a really powerful message on just the overall value of work-based learning writ large. You can and just how different traditional classroom instruction is from work-based learning and career-connected learning. You can talk about electrical theory in a classroom as much as you want. You're not going to know what it feels like to lay down a wire until you are actually laying down a wire and simulating that. So that's a really powerful message, and I think it shows just how important that exposure is early on. Going back to Marina to talk about messaging here, you've worked across federal, state, nonprofit sectors. What have you seen work when it comes to framing apprenticeship in a way that resonates both with employers and with the public?
Well, I think, in terms of our work, one of the things that drives me, as I said, as a workforce development professional, is that we are preparing folks for one of the last remaining pathways, debt-free pathways to family sustaining work. And that I will say, like, obviously that is appealing to workers. It is also appealing to employers, right? Because employers have come, in our case, right, have typically come to trust the quality of the talent that they're getting through their apprenticeship partners. And so we are sort of expanding that pipeline to ensure that there's more and more people coming through that pipeline. I will say in terms of that particular question and thinking about the difference between folks coming through adult-based programs versus school-based or youth-serving programs. For our adult-based programs, we have a larger expectation or higher expectation in terms of number of people immediately placed into apprenticeship or employment, whereas in many cases, our high school-based programs are more exploratory. And communicating that and ensuring that the programs are really focusing on the folks that are screened, well, that relationship is maintained, but the folks are understanding who is exploring and who is actually looking for direct employment is really important. Um, and to Andrew's point, there is not really a strong national framework around that right now, and that's something that I think many of us on this call, I see some familiar faces in the chat and on the attendee list, are really interested in, because we know that this model in schools and serving youth is different than it is for adults because they are two different populations, right? And there are still very successful outcomes that our participants can have, even if they're not necessarily ready to enter a 4-year apprenticeship immediately after graduation. But we want to make sure that we are supporting those that are ready for that pathway and that do know that they want to continue on that path, and exposing a wider number of folks so that perhaps several years down the line, they do actually come back to this when they are ready to do that type of work. So that, I would say, is some of the work that we're looking to separate out. And from a messaging perspective, I think clarifying that the standards are the same, right? That they have to meet the same standards for entry, regardless of whether they're coming through a youth pipeline or an adult pipeline. But that the program often has done the work of ensuring that the folks that are coming into that model are meeting the same standards, right? And are I would say, like, particularly excited about this because there are a number of folks in their class that decided that this is not necessarily the pathway for them.
Thank you, Marina. Yeah, and that makes total sense. And I think just a note of what you said there about how your youth programs are much more exploratory. I think that's important to note because I think you both noted in your introductions that um, sometimes people look at apprenticeship and youth apprenticeship in particular as like you are making a permanent decision for your life and you can't change it. I think that providing those exploratory pathways is super, super helpful and helps demystify this that, students in these pathways can see what they're interested in, figure out what they like, and they're not just placed into an apprenticeship program that they're not going to be interested in down the road. So I think that that's super helpful to note. Um, Andrew, going back to you, and on a similar vein, employers often ask, "What's in it for us?" when it comes to apprenticeship. I think employers often ask, "What's in it for us?" when it comes to any sort of question or hiring. That's the nature of employers. How do you help them understand both the tangible and the intangible return on investment?
Well, if they're asking what's in it for us, they must not have had a registered apprenticeship program yet because they would understand if they did, right? But we also build apprenticeship programs with new employers, so we do get this question a lot. And for me, the answer is quite simple: the ideal employee. The person that you wish you could clone within your work environment, the way that you do that predictably and develop new incoming talent to the same level of your ideal employee is through apprenticeship. And, often people say, there's a trough first, the value comes back to you later. I would disagree. A well-prepared entry-level first-year apprentice earns their keep on day one. So just to make it a little less intangible, you know, I was hired, just in case there's anybody from the West Coast, I was hired by Nibby Brothers Construction in California, in San Francisco. They took me in at 17. They groomed me throughout my entire apprenticeship to be the ideal carpenter for them, for their particular model of business, running the full gamut of the carpentry services that they did. I was running work by the time that I graduated my apprenticeship program, and I stayed with that employer for 10 years. Trust me, that employer got their value, right? So by demonstrating that, um, first of all, any entry-level apprentice needs to be a productive employee from day one. And if they have been prepared through a spectrum of work-based learning opportunities, through apprenticeship readiness, through pre-apprenticeship, prior to beginning their employment, they are going to really excel, and they're going to outperform somebody coming in off the street. And the value is there in the proof, right? So when you have a productive employee from day one who is allowing your journey worker, the person who's already mastered that occupation, to perform at their highest and best level, and the more elementary task can be taken up by somebody who's being paid less while they know less, it makes a ton of sense for a business model. So I think when an employer doesn't understand the value proposition of taking in a brand new entry-level employee as an apprentice, it just means they haven't had good experience with the model yet. And when they do, they're going to see that it's actually predictable talent development that grooms somebody exactly the way you need them to perform their occupation, and to do it within the business model that's unique to your particular environment.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, that makes total sense, and I think that's the perfect way to pitch it. And similarly, jump back to you, Marina. You know, talking about that, how do you think about balancing employer needs with the goal of expanding access to these high quality opportunities for underrepresented youth in the trades? And generally, how do you think about balancing that, economic employer, what's in it for me, versus, how can we get these pathways expanded for youth?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of employer need, sort of echoing everything that Andrew said in terms of benefit to the employer, and also as the 10-year example showed, retention is a very significant benefit to the employer. Um, I mean, in terms of that balance, I mean, to me, there's no trade-off. It's a math problem, right, that people are looking to solve, which is that you need talent, and to ensure that you are recruiting the best possible talent and the largest volume to meet your talent need, you need to recruit from all communities, and you need to start recruiting earlier, right? And I think that is the narrative that has driven a lot of our programs, employer partners, and a lot of the national level conversations that we have, which is how do we ensure that the communities where we are doing work both have the opportunity to participate, right, in the job opportunities that are there, but also that just from a practical perspective, like you need the labor, right? So you need to recruit from those areas. Actually, just to go back to the Austin example, which I was talking about earlier, I was at the graduation for one of the programs over the summer, and there was a participant from the program who, this was, I would say, is actually a good example, very successful cohort. They had 23 participants that were recruited from a local high school. They all graduated from the program. 100% were placed and starting on the job on Monday, which I will say, just to caveat, that is a very, very good outcome. But in that particular example, one of the participants who was starting with the UA local plumber apprenticeship program, his last name had looked familiar to the training director. And when he asked how he heard about the program, he said, "Oh, I heard about it from my brother, right, who is an electrician apprentice with the IBEW local. He did the program 2 years ago." And to me, that's just an example of how you reframe the word of mouth problem, right, that a lot of our industries have, which is you are expanding the boundaries of where word of mouth essentially can go, where you have a community that was previously not as well represented in this industry as it should be. And now you have recruitment doing its own work, right? Like word of mouth is always going to be there. We just need more mouths. So that's kind of, to me, there's no trade-off between employer needs and underrepresented populations in general. It's actually like a business imperative to ensure that we are recruiting across ages, across all communities, to fill the need that our employers are telling us they have.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. That's an awesome story, and I think that harkens back to what we were talking about earlier, that the best organizers for this and for expansion of apprenticeship writ large are trusted messengers, and that is whether that's trusted messengers from employer to employer or that's trusted messengers from apprentice to family member. And the more we can do that, and the more we can get those mouths having the words, that I think that's how we how we expand this nationwide. Just a reminder to everybody, sort of passing the 2/3 halfway mark here. If you have any questions for our panelists, please drop them in the chat. We can answer them as we move into our discussion part. So please ask some questions. The floor is now open for Q&A. I have some questions for you both that'll jump in, and hopefully get our attendees moving. Andrew, first to you. The conversation around engaging apprenticeship in construction pathways and careers is obviously ongoing, but it seems like we are seeing a lot of momentum to create more bridges for youth in construction. What do you feel like the roadblocks have been up until now, and whether those are real or not? And what are you guys doing to find creative, safe inclusion of youth in construction?
Mhm. Yeah, so it's a very interesting question. So some of the roadblocks, I think it depends on what population you're working with, first and foremost. So I will say the Building Futures specifically, we've been around for 18 years now, and just to build on Marina's point around the word of mouth issues, we place entire families, right? So we have 16 training slots that open up a few times per year. We have 280 people attend orientations looking to be in one of those 16 slots. So once people see that there is success, that there's pathways from underrepresented populations and communities into real family sustaining careers that transform lives, the word of mouth spreads. So I'll just say that. But the reason I mentioned about the population that you're serving is because it matters for the intervention. So if we're talking about a high school age population, my unsolicited advice, or perhaps solicited, would be don't focus on advanced standing or credit. Focus on access and preparation, right? And so I say that because I have often run into great CT programs who say, we put somebody through this incredible curriculum. Why isn't an apprenticeship program recognizing our students with advanced standing? It's the wrong question. The question is, do you have access predictably for your students to engage learning as a registered apprentice employee? And to make sure that that happens, I would say create a controlled learning environment. In a high school environment, that means a co-op model, right? Please, and this is just again, from my soapbox, don't focus on placing a young adult in an internship with a construction employer. Instead, focus on stimulating the industry norms through a workplace environment where you can control and ensure safety, right? So these are very important interventions. So like, for instance, I cut my teeth in the nonprofit sector by rebuilding a youth build program. And I love that model. It was the inspiration for launching Building Futures to meet some of the gaps that it doesn't. But we built a house a year with a group of 30 young adults over a 10-month span as they earn their GED. Beautiful, controlled and learning environment where we could ensure safety, expose people to the balance of the basic skills necessary for any of the trades, and bring employers to us as opposed to bringing our students to employers. I think that those are key aspects of how we can bridge the gap and some of the places where there have been roadblocks, because let's just face it, construction is a very dangerous industry. And I will also say that there are some unscrupulous construction employers out there. And we have to protect, the entire national apprenticeship system was designed to protect the welfare of the apprentice. And so we don't want to lose sight of that when we're talking about getting people ready for apprenticeship either. We have to, safeguard the welfare of the learner. We have to create a controlled learning environment which doesn't supplant the industry, but provides a controlled learning environment which adds to their ability to transition into that into employment. And I think it's pretty critical. And I think that the main thing to focus on is access to apprenticeship, not how much credit. And I'll just put it bluntly. You can have the best mechanic in the world, the best person at their trade, the best person in terms of their grade, but if they don't have a valid driver's license and they can't show up every day on time, they are not a good placement, no matter how talented they are. So pre-apprenticeship is where you can really refine and ensure that somebody is not experiencing barriers to be a poor ambassador to that first employer. And a controlled learning environment is where you can allow somebody the balance of the basic skills, but without supplanting the industry or putting somebody in harm's way. So I think that those are some key aspects, and I could talk for an hour about the ways in which you could set that up. So I'll hold there for now.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrew. And thank you to our chat for getting some questions in. Marina would actually just love to hear your answer to that too. I know we just heard from Andrew about what it's like in Rhode Island on the ground in this specific community, but would love to hear from your perspective, from Trades Futures perspective, being so national across the board. What roadblocks are you seeing and what are you guys doing to get around those roadblocks?
Yeah, so I think one roadblock I think is I think roadblock is a strong word, but it's just again a lot of this growth across of pre-apprenticeship of apprenticeship readiness into apprenticeship has been organic, right? And I think as a result, there in some cases is a lack of standardization in terms of what works right across the network. I think that's particularly true for youth serving and high school programs. So that is certainly a challenge, but I think the reason why I'm not particularly discouraged by it is because it's definitely an opportunity. Like it's just a low-hanging fruit from a workforce development perspective, right? How do we identify what works? How do we uplift the work that great programs like Building Futures Rhode Island are doing and support other programs in implementing that same model? One thing that I would also sort of point two is in a lot along with our sort of programmatic work, social finance is currently doing like a return on investment study, which is looking at the value of pre-apprenticeship and in supporting all of these outcomes that we are all working towards across many different standards. And I think for us, that's very helpful because there's a lot of, again, pre-apprenticeship right now and into apprenticeship, that model is a lot of different points of light. But there is lack of a sort of standard way to establish those types of programs and models in a way that is replicable across the country. I think our goal, if I were to look at it from a recruitment end, is we have uh, areas where we have like a particularly large density of our types of programs where folks can say like 10% of apprentices in LA County, came from LA pre-apprenticeship programs. Like I would love to be able to say something like that about our youth apprenticeship or school-based programs at some point as well. You obviously need a lot of resources and a lot of standardization across the board to get there. But a lot of these challenges, I think, are really just a great opportunity that we're all going to work towards addressing over the next several years.
Could agree more, Marina. I think when it comes to all of our systematic problems, there are no challenges, just opportunities. So excited to be tackling them together. I'm going to jump into our questions from the chat now. So Andrew, Marina, feel free to just jump in, either of you,
Do
wherever
you
you have
just mind one
thoughts.
comment before
Yes,
we move
please.
into the,
Yeah.
just to drive home this point, work-based learning is a spectrum word, right? So there's and there's value in all of it. But Building Futures runs a pre-apprenticeship program which has a direct entry agreement with the various building trades unions. We also run two apprenticeship readiness programs, right? So one is focused on the currently incarcerated to help prepare them for a successful reintegration into community and society. And the other one is focused on young adults, precisely because we've noticed stubbornly over the years that 18, 19-year-olds aren't quite ready for the rigors of our pre-apprenticeship program. So we launched a environmentally focused young adult program, which helps close that gap. And the only reason I raise this is, to your point, there's no challenges, just opportunities. And the opportunity here is to design a different way to work with young adults prior to our pre-apprenticeship. So we did that through an apprenticeship readiness program. So my point being that you can build a spectrum of programmatic services that meet somebody where they're at and engage them in work-based learning, which I do believe fosters the best critical thinking skills, because you can't run away from your problems, right? You have to actually solve them. But we have to do that in a way that recognizes the whole of the individual and allows us to get a look at whether somebody has the life conditions necessary to be successful in apprenticeship. So to best prepare a young adult, it requires a spectrum of opportunities, and there's always a good way to do it. So sorry to jump in, but I couldn't help it.
No, please. I think,
Well,
yeah. Thank you. Go ahead,
and
Marina.
it, and Connor, if I can actually add to Andrew's point and answer one of the or start to answer Claire's question in the comments, which is what needs to happen at the K-8 level to prepare high school aged youth for apprenticeships. I think that concept of a spectrum is really critical, right? Where I would think of it as like registered apprenticeship is over here, where the payoff is really high because it is actual employment and you're earning a wage that is progressing over time while you are learning. It is also one of the more difficult, workforce development models because it's such a good payout rate. It takes a lot of time and effort to set up that type of model, and that type of structure has taken generations, right, to develop. On the other end of the spectrum are things like career days, right? Career fairs, and then I'd say somewhere in the middle and there's a whole bunch of other sort of workforce development, career exposure opportunities. And I would say apprenticeship readiness and pre-apprenticeship programs are somewhere over here if you're sort of tracking my very precise metrics here. So while we do not work sort of at that age, there are a variety of opportunities that are significantly lower lift than some of the work that I think we're talking about that are really tied to exposure at a younger grade that we see some of our programs honestly anecdotally engage in, right? It's less structured, and I would love to see it be more structured in terms of what works best at that age. But we generally see like any type of partnership that is anything from having speakers, visit. I mean, usually it's harder to have that age group visit. Although I will say we do a large conference called Tradeswomen Build Nations, which is the largest convening of tradeswomen, I think, in the world. But you won't cite me. But we did it in Chicago, and we did have a class of eighth graders from Chicago Public Schools there this past year. So I think there's a lot of exposure opportunities that we could certainly capitalize on in order to do that lighter lift exposure sort of earlier on.
Awesome. Thank you, Marina, and thank you both for that. Super helpful, and thank you for getting to the question in the chat. I think going back to our first question we got in the chat is sort of a logistical data question from Carly, who is asking for both of you guys, how do you guys both prefer to track and present success data through Rapids or through other means? It sounds like Carly is at the beginning of the data gathering phase in their apprenticeship program. So we'd love to hear just logistically how you guys track data.
I'm happy to jump in there first. We built a custom programmatic database right from the beginning, before our state actually transitioned to the Rapids system. So we have always been tracking our data over time and working directly with the union apprenticeship programs in which we place folks to measure retention and completion of the programs. We have multiple alumni gatherings, which allow us to gather information directly from our alumni that we may have missed. But we've always had good data systems in terms of not only tracking the interventions that we provided, where people are at and what they're working on, which trade they entered into, where they're at in their progression, when they completed, when they became a journey worker. And thankfully, in our role as the state apprenticeship agency intermediary in Rhode Island, we helped the state of Rhode Island transition to the Rapids data system throughout 2016, and really from 2017 forwards. We have been tracking all things in Rapids, which in that case, it's very easy, right? You just have to make sure that you're matching the Rapids ID number, and then you can track your pre-apprentice's success through the Rapids data system if you have access to it, or your state apprenticeship agency staff can do it if you don't have direct access. So there's a lot of ways to track once they're already placed in the registered apprenticeship system, but you have to make sure that you're tagging them in the front end so you know what the Rapids ID number are, and you're tracking them over time. And I will say that I'm very excited to work with social finance around the value proposition that Marina was mentioning for pre-apprenticeship, because we've done this over a period of years, we're not tracking how many we place in apprenticeship. I'm tracking journey workers, right? So I want to see people on the other side of the system. I want to see those folks become union leaders. I want to see them become their own contractors. We want to see them running the work out there on the job site. And Rapids allows you to do that in real time. The more personal touch, I think, is making sure that you're building community, no matter what your program is, so that people come back to you for the value that you offer them as individuals. Routinely we have a couple hundred people show up at our alumni gatherings, and that to me is the best way to track data, because it's the most personal and uplifting, because you get to see the transformation in somebody's life. Oh, we need to run another graduate first-time homebuyer class. We have that many people who are looking to apply, right? So those are the beautiful ways to track data, but there are some efficiencies at scale through the Rapid system. Just make sure that we are tracking folks as they enter. In Rhode Island, this varies state to state. We have a certified pre-apprenticeship. So, you actually register your pre-apprenticeship. Not that there's a quality review, but basically on behalf of the sponsor. So we can track who has gone through a pre-apprenticeship and then tie those program participants and graduates to the Rapids ID number and track other programs over time as well.
Thank you,
And
Andrew. Go ahead,
yeah,
Marina.
I would just add, I mean, so all of our programs track data differently. I think Andrew's is probably one of the more extensive from a timeline perspective approaches. We have many programs that, for a variety of reasons, don't have the capacity or frankly relationships to track retention data in the same way. So that is the absolute best practice, because that is the ultimate point, right? We don't want to recruit folks into apprenticeships that they leave. And on our end, we have participants report up to the placement component. So that's what our sort of national data set looks like. The one thing that I will say, just Carly, to your point around presenting success data, I think we have found a lot of value in external partnerships that support our ability to present success data. Either this example, there was just a study out of the Illinois Economic Policy Institute that looked at the value of models like ours in Illinois, particularly because Illinois has a pretty sophisticated investment structure around pre-apprenticeship and a whole bid credit system that we could spend another hour on, that incentivizes contractors to hire from programs like ours. And I think we have found that our programs really benefit from partnerships with research institutions, local and national, to help tell that story. So I think, yes, like collecting data is a huge part of it, but our partnerships are really key to helping it grow outside of just our work. And the more advocates for this work, the better. So.
Absolutely. Thank you both. Going next to Crystal's question, who says, while I am a long-time proponent for equity work, there was a recent article by Rachel Lipson, who both of you may have read, but it's also in the chat, that proposes we begin treating workforce development, apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship included, as an R&D approach, a core driver of productivity and competitiveness, rather than anti-poverty work. How do you both, and Crystal is asking, how do you both react to such a thought aligned with your experiences in your work?
I mean, I can start because I think this is a great resource. I think this speaks to our earlier conversation around meeting employer demand, right? I don't think anyone is doing this work solely as equity or anti-poverty work. It is such because it meets employer demand. If there is not an employer on the other end of the program, then the employer is not successful in meeting anti-poverty or equity goals. And I think we see this very much as ensuring that the broadest possible talent pool is available to meet the employer's productivity goals, and that they are recruiting the most productive and sort of successful folks that are not otherwise excluded from this type of labor force. So I think there is absolutely a role for productivity and competitiveness in this narrative. And I think it's actually a really integral one, because again, it's ensuring that we are recruiting the broadest possible and brightest participants for our model and to build the infrastructure that we need as a country.
Yeah, just to build on that, joint programs through signatory contractors and members' dues put in an inordinate amount of trust funds that get invested for a college-like experience in terms of the training. It's not charity. None of this work is charity. Now, I haven't read the article, so I don't want to misspeak about it. I'd be curious to see how they're framing the research and development approach to pre-apprenticeship and an apprenticeship. But I will say that if we have structured an apprenticeship program so that there's a question on whether or not somebody is adding to the competitive value, we haven't done it right. So an apprentice from day one is adding to the competitive advantage, even if they're fully learning their occupation. As I mentioned earlier, that just means the program isn't structured appropriately to allow the apprentice to focus on the lower level, entry level tasks, and allow the journey worker to focus on highest and best use. When you do that, you actually create a competitive advantage for employing apprenticeship and doing the talent development that you need as a company as a whole, right? It's a both and scenario. So an apprentice should be productive throughout their entire apprenticeship. There never should be a point where you're saying, hopefully that apprentice is going to pay off someday. That apprentice should be paying off every day. And if that apprentice isn't, that just means something's wrong with the program design, and we need to look at that aspect of it instead. There is no way that somebody can argue that I did not prove my value to my employer every single day of my apprenticeship for the 8,000 hours it took me to complete it. I know I did, and so did my employer. And that's why I was never laid off throughout my entire apprenticeship, and that's why they kept me around for a good 10 years afterwards, right? So to me, it's a false argument, and often I think it's held up as a barrier from employers who haven't quite recognized that the best thing for their business model is to have a predictable way to develop their talent and bring people up at full occupational competency in a way that's meaningful for everyone involved.
And I think just because this is one of my favorite topics, also just to add to that, one of the things that we saw in the recent sort of era of industrial policy investments tied to the Infrastructure Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and a lot of the investments in energy and the Chips and Science Act were policies that required or preferred, the owner or the contractors to partner with local training programs, to have apprentice utilization goals, or other sort of ways to ensure that there is an adequate workforce to actually build that project. And just as an example, to use apprentice utilization targets as an example, right? What that would be is saying, you're building a publicly supported infrastructure project. We'd like you to have 20% or 15%, let's say, of your workforce on that project be apprentices. If you're a contractor that's coming in and 2% of your workforce is apprentices, you're going to have a real problem building that long-term competitiveness and productivity if nobody is learning how to do this work, right? So this approach is integral to ensuring that we have the workforce to allow us to remain competitive and productive, not just in this current moment, but for many generations to come.
Yeah, and I just got to chime in a little bit on that one. We've run an apprenticeship utilization program precisely because of those dynamics since 2008. So I'll just highlight two of our partners, Brown University and the City of Providence. Both of them require that apprentices, one, registered apprenticeship by contractors is a qualification in order to bid, and two, that the contractors, when performing their scopes, 15% of the labor hours come from apprentices. And that applies to all projects over $5 million at Brown University. And what that does is it equalizes the playing field for the bidding contractors. No contractor has a competitive disadvantage by employing the right number of apprentices on a job site. And by doing that, you have a long-term institution who uses construction services year over year, helping to set the stage for workforce development, because sometimes construction employers have a short-term event horizon, right? They're living bid to bid. So sometimes they're not thinking about employing an adequate number of apprentices to train the future generation. They're thinking about making it through a 3-month scope so they can live to bid another day. It takes sometimes the institutional end users of construction to help us connect these dots and meet the long-term need for labor.
And Andrew, I think you just answered this a little bit talking about Brown, but Crystal's follow-up here, just quickly to you both, is asking, where do you guys see higher education's role in pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship? Obviously, you just talked about your experience with Brown, but writ large, what do you both see as higher education's role here?
I'll jump in with a couple of observations. One, there is the institutions as the user of construction services. That's a very obvious one, apprenticeship utilization programs, et cetera. At the other place, we have institutes of higher eds who are sponsoring apprenticeship programs for non-traditional occupations on a regular basis now. more and more institutions of higher ed are providing the related instruction for new apprenticeship programs as they develop. There's credit-bearing apprenticeship programs, there's degree-granting apprenticeship programs, and there are colleges who are recognizing that in order to, I won't say remain relevant, but to meet the particular needs of populations in particular occupations, that they can be the aggregator of demand from smaller employers and provide a value to the business ecosystem. And what I mean by that, just very simply, if say there's a group of 50 small manufacturers, just picking an occupational sector, and all of them have 1 to 2 employees. None of them are going to have a huge appetite for the administrative aspects of running a registered apprenticeship program. But if you take a university and they serve as the aggregator for a multi-employer model, all of a sudden you've created efficiencies so the businesses can participate with the Institute of Higher Ed in their talent development strategy. So I actually think there's a very robust role for institutes of higher education within apprenticeship. It comes from being a sponsor. It also could reflect as being a related instruction provider, or it could also come from being an end user of construction services in the traditional trade occupation. So there's a lot of different ways that institutes of higher ed are very important to this equation.
And just a final quick lightning round question before we close from Jenny, who says they're interested in the difference between high school pre-apprenticeship models that operate at the high school versus at an off-site training facility. What are the advantages and disadvantages you've seen in the difference between those two programs, and what have you seen example-wise that enables high school students to interact with active apprentices, noting that they see cases where high school regulations do not allow or get in the way of doing that?
I would say in our case, most of our high school serving programs operate through high schools. Not exclusively, but they typically do. And a lot of that is just tied to some of the challenges that I think are highlighted in the question around being off-site during the day. Um, and I think, again, the benefit of that type of model is that you have a wide range of students exposed who may not have otherwise participated. We actually have some programs that even start in 9th and 10th grade, for example, where they do that type of broader exposure, and then through our program, and then they end up, like if they're in a CTE program, doing like a electrician specific pathway in 11th and 12th grade, right? So they go through that type of structure. They do still do often field or site visits to training facilities. And I think that's very valuable in any pre-apprenticeship model, because it's very important to see the type of environment that you would actually be training in as an apprentice. So that is, I would say for us, it is mostly on-site models. I don't know, in Andrew's setting, there may be some that are also off-site, but for high school students, they're primarily tied to the high school.
Awesome. Thank you, Marina, and thank you both, Andrew and Marina, and for everybody here for thank Andrew, Marina in particular, for sharing your incredible experience and thoughts here, and for all of our attendees for some very thought-provoking questions and keeping the discussion going. This was great. We love to have you here, and I hope everybody here learned a little bit. I think what we heard this afternoon really underscores something powerful, that youth apprenticeship and skilled trades isn't just possible, it's working. And everybody here should go out and tell people that. When employers, educators, intermediaries, the whole ecosystem comes together with intention, we can create pathways that open doors for young people while meeting the real workforce needs of the industry. And I think there are a couple of big themes that stood out today. Number one is the importance of building trust with employers, with communities, with schools, in preparation and communication. Additionally, the need to measure and tell the ROI story clearly. And then also, of course, the reminder that young people bring energy, curiosity, and capability to job sites when we set them up for success. So as we continue to this work across all our networks, I encourage you to take one idea from today and put it into action. It could be reframing your employer outreach message, connecting with a peer a few steps ahead, or spotlighting a success story from your own community. Every conversation you have, as we were saying, every part of the word of mouth organizing experience helps shifts the mindset and grows opportunities. So before I close officially, I just want to remind everybody to please, if you have not already, register for our National Youth Apprenticeship Summit in December. We would love to see you there. It's going to be a lot of fun. I will be there. Our whole team will be there. It's in Alexandria. So super excited for that. Hopefully you guys can come. Please register at the QR code here that can help you get to the link to officially register. And then to officially close with 1 minute left, just want to say on behalf of CareerWise and Paya, thank you again both for all the work you're doing to make apprenticeship reality for more young people in the skilled trades. We look forward to continuing this conversation and supporting you both as you build what's next. Thanks, everybody.